The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to Odysseeware's webinar, How to Implement a Personalized Competency-Based Learning Program. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Tyler Wood from the Odysseyware marketing team and your webinar host for the day. Today we'll discuss the key elements of a competency-based learning program and how Odysseyware supports each step. Presenting today is Tiffany Hicks, our very own Odysseyware implementation consultant. Tiffany has spent 22 years in education with the goal of empowering students, teachers, and parents to personalize and individualize learning. She has served as a high school English teacher, middle school reading teacher, department chair, and teacher leader. She also has served in the education curriculum space through various textbook companies and online learning solution companies, training teachers and administrators on how to teach to the edges to better reach all students and integrate technology as a tool to personalize and individualize learning. We are excited to have Tiffany present today on a topic she is quite familiar with. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. Attendees will be on mute, but feel free to submit questions through the presentation using our chat feature. We will review and organize for Q&A at the end of our session. So now I would like to turn it over to Tiffany to kick off our webinar.
Hey, thanks, Tyler. So thank you guys for joining us today, and I am super passionate and excited about talking to you about competency-based learning and what it can mean for you and also your school districts and students. You know, just to kind of kick this off, I'd just like to say it's hard really to go anywhere without hearing about personalized learning, blended learning, and we're hearing a whole lot more about competency-based learning. And those who've actually adopted these types of programs are truly reaping the benefits with student achievement, engagement, and of course a lot more people are talking and a lot more people are listening. So thank you for joining our conversation today about CBL, competency-based learning. So with that, I want to kind of kick it off with some what ifs. I kind of like to ponder and think about what if. What if students were allowed to progress at their own pace in all subject areas? What if there were no age-based learning? So envision with me for just a moment, no classrooms of all second grade students learning second grade content taught by a second grade teacher, or maybe on the flip side, no biology classroom where everybody's learning the same thing in the same way at the same time. What if students could actually choose the instructional settings that they preferred and that best suits their learning style? So there's no more of turning to the same page in a textbook or all going to the computer lab for the same instructional practice. In other words, they are able to employ student agency, more voice and choice. You know, the last question, and you can see it there in yellow on my screen, but it's really a question I think we need to ask ourselves in education. What would happen if students were not allowed to fail? In other words, they were allowed to progress at a pace that's meaningful to them and to show progress. So the mission of competency-based learning and how it came about is really pretty simple. It's about every child, every day. And it's about being able to provide an equal opportunity for all kids to show growth and to reach their maximum potential no matter where they're starting. So one thing that they know, and you can see it up here on my screen, is that one-size-fits-all mentality really wasn't working to meet the needs of all of their students. So I thought I would just start with more of a formal definition of CBL. What is it? So if you take a look at my screen, you can see that CBL describes learning progression in terms of mastery rather than passage of time. And that's one of the biggest differences. So it's not about the time, it's not about the quote grade level, but it's about mastery and students progressing at a meaningful pace that's meaningful for them, while the teacher is providing that true differentiated support. So I like to simplify things and kind of ask further questions. What does that really mean? Well, it means that you're looking at every individual student and you're asking the question, how does that student perform best? And then you're figuring out a way to personalize that instruction and content so that every student can grow and learn. It's really about teachers not necessarily teaching grade levels per se, but teaching students, which is what we do every single day. So I thought that we should really kind of look at the experts in this area and kind of take a look at some of the key principles for a competency-based learning program. And as you take a look at my screen, you can see this is what INACOL and also CCSSO have to say are important in terms of a definition of competency and competency-based learning. So first is, again, that advancement based on mastery, or competency, as many people call it. So once a student masters or is competent with a particular skill or standard, he or she is going to work at meaningful progress, and that's independent of what his or her peers may be learning. Now, the second key component is that competencies must be explicit, measurable, and transferable. So it's not just learning in isolation or ideas that could be considered vague or immeasurable, but it has to have that measurable, explicit quality. Third, and this is one of the ones that I'm actually most excited about, and I think you will be too, is that assessments are meaningful and they're positive for students. Now imagine that. As educators, I think we all agree that assessments are very important to measure growth, but when we think about the way that assessments have particularly been used in a traditional education setting, we're often seeing things like over-testing or benchmarks or the same test for all. So assessments end up being a negative thing for many of our students. So in this way, assessments are used in a positive way and for what they were intended, which is a measure of growth, not necessarily just a pass-fail. Fourth key element, it is true differentiated instruction at its finest. It's rapid, and it's based on individual needs. And this is one of the reasons that digital learning or technology tools are so powerful for CBL implementations. And then finally, the fifth is that high-level, meaningful learning will take place at the application and creation levels. So it's not just low-level type concepts that students are mastering, but it's really knowledge that prepares students for college, career, and for life. Now, I want to pause for just a minute and think about the implications of the new federal legislation, ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and think about how the principles of competency-based learning align with what we're seeing with the flexibility of that new ESSA legislation. So there's really three key things that we're seeing in ESSA that are important to consider when you're talking about competency-based learning. First, prior to ESSA, it was actually against the law to use adaptive assessments and test items for state tests outside of a student's grade levels. So even if a student was working above or below, it was actually prohibited for them to be tested on that content outside of their grade levels for state tests. So again, it kind of goes back to that one-size-fits-all lens. Two, and you can see the second bullet point up there, ESSA gives much more responsibility and flexibility to state-level decision-making. So in other words, there aren't necessarily mandates that are passed down from the national government level, but ESSA does require a minimum framework. And one of the things that we're seeing within that minimum framework is that states must include a measure of student growth. And I think that is the key right there, student growth. So as students are working through a competency-based program, it's not, again, about pass or fail, but it's about how much academic growth that they're making. And then third, as you take a look at that bottom point, and you can see that I bold-faced some key words there, that ESSA actually specifically permits the use of competency-based assessments to measure student growth and progress. So again, it's really focusing on the very best way to assess and measure growth for all of our students. So with that, you can imagine that there's a lot of interest in CBL. And we're actually working with schools all across the nation who are beginning to offer competency-based, personalized learning experiences to their students. But what we're seeing is that as many of them are getting started, they're actually trying to locate or create many of the elements on their own. And we all know as educators that takes time, that takes money, that takes resources. And what we found is that sometimes in the end, the assessment or the data components don't actually integrate with the other program features. And that's a key element of a successful program, and it's a requirement, obviously, of ESSA. So bottom line is, data-driven decisions will be critical for a competency-based learning program, and thus why solid technology programs out there that can provide that data and link it as necessary to the instruction and learning will be critical. So I want to kind of talk about 7 key elements during our time today. that really make for a successful competency-based learning program. And as we worked with partners and districts across the nation, these are the 7 key things that we see are critical and important. The first is kind of global, and I have it by itself, and that is flexibility. So as districts are looking for supports for competency-based learning programs, they want to look for things that provide flexibility. Not just a set of solutions, but something that is flexible and customizable to actually be able to meet the needs of all learners, because that's ultimately the goal of a competency-based learning program. So one of the things I just want to share up front, with the Odysseyware solutions, we offer multiple flexible implementation options. So not just over time, path, place, and pace, but also over the way that the content can be delivered to the students and what content is delivered. So you'll see things like fully online solutions. We work with partners that take more of a blended approach. We have some that may implement a flex blended approach, a flipped approach, or really whatever it takes to meet the needs of the students. But the key is finding technology solutions that are flexible and customizable to meet those needs. Now, the other 6 elements you'll see up here on my screen, and we're going to dive into each of these individually, but these are all key elements to consider for successfully launching a competency-based learning program. The first is, you'll see it up here on the left-hand side, standards-aligned content. So let's begin by talking about that. Odysseyware actually offers over 300 standards-aligned courses, and this is for all subject areas. So you'll see things like English language arts courses, math, science and social studies, but at the same time, you also want content that you can access for your students who are working above level, such as advanced placement courses, as well as students who might need more help, such as test prep content or remediation tools. Odysseyware offers all of that. We also actually offer over 83 career and technical education courses. So when you're looking for something to support your competency-based learning program, you want something that has courseware across a variety of areas and at a variety of levels. Now, just to kind of give you an idea of what's offered through Odysseyware, we actually have one of the largest repository of standards-aligned digital content in the marketplace, with over 32,000 assignments, that's lessons and projects, over 354,000 assessment items, and one of the things I'm most excited about, over 54,000 media elements, things like videos and dynamic learning activities, virtual labs, virtual simulations, and a whole lot more. So as you're launching a competency-based program, think about the standards-aligned content that your students will have access to, and again, how it should be from multiple subject areas and also multiple levels of support. Now, one of the second key elements is what you see here in the center, equitable instructional supports. So how can we ensure that that content is equitable and accessible for all learners? And of course, we know that we're seeing a growing population, for example, of English language learners, as well as special education students. So we want to make sure that every student has equitable access to this content. So I want to go ahead and jump in live to the Odysseyware solution. And I want to show you just a little glimpse of what some of that content would look like for your students. So this is actually the Odysseyware student portal, and one of the things that we find important to students in a CBL approach is that they have access to help at any time. So we provide them, for example, with a navigation overview video. We give them access to our technology hotlines with extended hours and even weekend supports. We always give them access to their teacher through messaging support. And then when they click on the Learn button, they'll actually see a highly personalized list of content provided to them. This is what I like to call their digital backpack, or in some cases, the playlist of content. Now, our content can function in multiple ways, but most of our CBL partners really like to function in what we call a CRX mode. And what that means is students would take an assessment at the beginning of each unit of content, and then based on their mastery or competency levels, they are assigned a highly individualized learning path. So for example, this student has demonstrated mastery on many concepts, and so they're not appearing here on their list, but what they really need to work on is assigned specifically to them. All right, let me go ahead and just click on a lesson so you kind of get an idea of these equitable instructional supports. First of all, the pedagogy behind the Odysseyware lessons was designed to support all learners. A gradual release of responsibility where students are provided with chunks of information. You'll see direct instruction, followed by guided practice, followed by, for example, independent practice to set all learners up for success. But you'll also see that all lessons have, for example, clear and measurable objectives at the beginning, as well as emphasis on vocabulary, academic vocabulary. And you'll see that there's multiple ways that learners can learn that vocabulary. They can see it, they can hear it, they can play games with it, and of course they can work with the words in context. Now I want you to keep an eye for just a moment here on this little toolbox that you see over here on the right-hand side, because this is one of the ways that Odysseyware makes content accessible for all learners. And that's through our instructional toolbox that follows us in every lesson within our system. So for example, if a student comes across a word he doesn't know, he doesn't have to exit the system and go elsewhere. He can simply highlight the word, get a definition and context behind the word, and keep moving along in his learning. Also, for students who might have, for example, IEPs or special education students, they have access to our Speak As feature, and they can select from 6 different voices, all at different rates and fluencies, to hear the content read out loud. Now, you may not be able to hear it completely through the speakers on our webinar today, but you can hear that it's actually being read out loud. And then you also notice the highlighting and tracking and bold-facing features that really make the content accessible for everyone. And for our English language learners, we want the content accessible for them as well. You'll notice that students have the ability to have the content translated into one of 23 different languages with audio supports. So if a student needs to see it in his native language, he can, but we also often find that students lack certain literacy skills in their native languages, so they may also need to hear. So it's those kinds of tools that really make the instructional content accessible for everyone. And it's also about differentiating the instruction of how students learn best. So for example, through our lessons, you'll notice that we provide some text elements like you see here, but we also intersperse those with media elements or videos like you see here. So the students can choose, do I prefer to learn this concept more through video instruction? And if so, I can watch the video. Or do I prefer to read the text, or a combination of the two? And again, what you'll notice is that students have control over their learning, and even control within the videos to replay, pause, rewind, and rewatch, and that we try to keep the videos short to be able to keep students engaged. Now finally, you probably noticed these little notes over here in the left-hand side. Students can actually take interactive notes as they move through any of the lessons, and teachers can also drop in notes of their own as additional scaffolds. Now, I do want to go ahead and just jump to a couple of assessment questions, because we do want to assess and get that meaningful progress, but in a positive way. You'll notice multiple different question types within our lessons, but you'll also want to notice that we provide those supports to make equitable access for all. So if students need to have questions read aloud, they can. You'll see that all questions are related back to a section from the lesson, and as always, students can always ask for help. So thinking back to our original points, as we were talking about, for example, how students can actually access our content, then you will see that students have the opportunity to access it with multiple supports. Now let's pause for just a minute and talk about peer collaboration. Because within competency-based learning programs, peer collaboration is often very encouraged. So not only could students work on this content independently, but they can also work on content with their peers. For example, they may actually conduct some virtual labs or conduct some of our dynamic learning activities as groups. They can also take notes and share and communicate both with their teachers and their peers within the system. So now that you've heard a little bit about the equitable instructional supports, I want to move to the customization, because this is probably one of the most key things for a competency-based learning program. It's all about personalizing for individual students. So instead of buying a static set of resources that would not be a one-size-fits-all, You want to look for things that are adaptive and customizable. And that's what most of our customers love about Odysseyware. So first of all, the content and lessons within Odysseyware can be delivered in a variety of ways. They could be led by teacher in whole group or small group instruction. They also can be led independently with students, obviously integrating technology in blended settings and using any kind of devices or technology that your students would have access to. But in addition to being able to customize how the content is delivered, so the preference of the teachers and students, we also can customize the content itself. And in fact, we take what I like to call a multi-tiered approach to customization. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, that means that you could assign the course with those content scaffolds to any student who needs it, or even portions of the course, lessons, topics, etc. But you also have the ability to put any of the courses into more of a mastery-based approach through our prescriptive learning paths. This is our CRX mode, where students would take a test at the beginning of the units and basically test out or show mastery of what they know, and yet get prescriptive learning paths for what they don't. And then finally, and I want to show this to you live, all content and courses within Odysseyware can be fully customized to meet the needs of individual students, and teachers can even author their own content to best meet the needs of all learners. So let me jump back over to the solution live one last time. And this time I want to sign out as a student. And I want you to just get a quick glimpse into how our CBL partners use Odysseyware from a teacher perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the Courses tab, and this is where you would actually have access to all of the content in Odysseyware, and you can assign what you wanted for your students. But many of our CBL partners love the search functionality within our system, and they can search not only by curriculum or content, but also by topic or standards. So for example, if I'm a teacher that realizes some of my students were struggling with fractions and I really want to personalize that for which students and what levels they need, I can search the content within Odysseyware. I can actually customize and filter for specific types and grade levels and be able to provide that content specifically to those students. I also, of course, have the ability to search by standards, whatever standards that your particular state may be using. Now, I do want to just show you quickly how you can customize any course within Odysseyware by simply copying it and making it a custom course for you. So I'm going to pull up a custom course that I have been working in and just show you how easy it is to personalize it for your district and your students. So for example, if you want a specific scope and sequence of content and how it's delivered, it's as easy as rearranging or getting rid of what you don't want within the system. You will also have the ability to customize at the lesson levels by moving around any of the specific lessons or specific quizzes that you would want within the system. So a highly customizable way to meet the needs of your individual students. Now, I do want to introduce you to a concept from Odysseyware called Flex that works perfectly with our CBL partners. And what this means is, even though you customize the content in the system, the assessments will automatically flex, update, and match for that content. So for example, I have a quiz here within this set of content that comes after 2 lessons. And if I preview that quiz and jump down to the bottom of that quiz, I can see that there are 8 questions on that particular assessment. Now, if I change my mind and I decide, you know, I really would like to quiz my students after 3 lessons instead, I simply can move the quiz down, but take a look at, as I go back into the quiz, how it automatically adapts for that learner. So instead of having the 8 questions that we saw before, now it actually added and has 13 questions based on the content that is being assessed. So highly adaptive for students. You also have the ability to add additional content as you see fit. So for example, let's say that I would really prefer to have meaningful assessments after every 2 lessons. I can simply add that in the system, and it is intuitive and adaptive enough to already know which questions, there were 3 in this case, that should align for those particular lessons. Now, last couple of things that I want to share in terms of customization is you can also make this your own in any way that you want. So many of our partners love cross-curricular integration. For example, as a student is learning about slope, one of the very best ways to make that meaningful is to pull something from other content that would truly make slope meaningful to that student. So for example, if I want to search within the repository of content in Odysseyware for a lesson on roofing, because roofers have to understand slope, I can do that. I can select the projects or lessons that I'd like, and now I can highly customize and integrate that into my current lesson. So it's a great way to really personalize for your students. And last but not least is the ability to create your own content within our system. If you can think it or you have access to it on the web, you can create it within our system. So for example, here we have a lesson that a teacher has created on LeBron James and Newton's third law of motion to meet the needs of her students. She has integrated some videos from the web as well as Khan Academy videos and even authored her own content. So just an amazing way, as we jump back to the PowerPoint, to really make sure that you have customizable solutions for your students. Now, I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I just want to touch on these other three key components that you see at the bottom of the screen as well. Assessment and reporting. So data will be key in any competency-based learning implementation. And one of the things that you'll want to know is that you will have access to live data within the Odysseyware system through things like visual and intuitive dashboards that give insight into not only student performance and mastery level, but also overall progress and time invested for success. You also will have access to reporting tools and live progress monitoring. So for example, this is a snapshot of our live gradebook that allows you to monitor meaningful progress for students and even get more granular information, as well as our assignment alerts that really keeps you on track with how your students are performing, who might be getting behind, and where you can make those meaningful instructional decisions based on data. So one of the critical elements is having data and assessment reporting that is tied to the content and instruction. And within Odysseyware, you are absolutely able to do that. All right, integrations, I do want to just quickly mention that as you're looking for competency-based solutions, you want one that, for lack of a better word, plays well with others, right? It integrates with the current solutions that you have, but most importantly, it's easy for students and teachers to use. So I would like to share with you that all content through Odysseyware is fully HTML5 compliant. It is Java-free and Flash-free, which means that it will work on any device and you don't have to worry about updating plugins. It is all on a single platform, so all of the content and courseware is accessible and will function in a similar way. And it actually has one of the smallest bandwidth footprints in the industry. So even though you have that great balance of text elements and videos and dynamic learning activities, it is something that works well in school environments. And then last but not least, as far as integrations, we do support single sign-on, SIS integrations, play well with other LMS systems, and if you're a district who is looking at LTI integration, we can certainly support that as well. Now, I've kind of saved the best for last, and then I'll turn it back over to Tyler for any questions that are popping in. But one of the last key components of a successful competency-based learning implementation is professional learning, because this is really transforming the way that your teachers are teaching and the way that some of your students are learning. So what I can share with you is that creating a personalized competency-based learning program absolutely could be challenging. And some of our districts have stated that one of the most important and critical components of their success has been professional learning. So we actually have a professional learning services team of seasoned educators who actually work with you face-to-face to help support this program. They can provide everything from coaching of teachers to applying of best practices, periodic data reviews, and much more to make sure guaranteed success. So this truly ensures that this program positively impacts the most important objectives, which are increasing student engagement and in turn increasing achievement. So I want to kind of go back to my pondering of my what if and think about this for just a few more minutes as we start to close out our session. So what if students were allowed to progress at their own pace? What if there were no age-based learning? What if they could exercise that student agency and have more voice and choice? And what if they were not allowed to fail but make meaningful progress? What if they had access to a solution like Odysseyware with the supports for students and teachers to make sure that every single student was successful? So I want to thank you guys for joining us today. We hope that this has given you a little bit more insight into what it takes to think about implementing competency-based learning in your district. And just want you to know that we would love the opportunity to share more with you about the 7 key elements that makes it work. So with that, Tyler, I know we've got maybe a minute left. Are there some questions that have come in that I could address?
Yes, absolutely. There's a question about the CRX mode. The question is, if a student does not show mastery on the pre-assessment, is the entire unit unlocked or just the lesson in the unit that the student needs to improve on?
So it actually can work both ways, but what we found with our competency-based learning programs is that they want it to unlock the lesson that the student did not show mastery. So in other words, the lessons that he did show mastery are skipped because he has already shown proficiency, but the ones where he did not show mastery actually show up in his very prescriptive learning playlist. And that way it's highly individualized for the student.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. We are out of time now, so we're going to conclude the broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we understand this may be your only break today, and we truly appreciate you taking the time to spend it with us. Shortly, you'll receive an email follow-up with the recording if you want to listen again, the presentation slides, and a flyer on how to implement a personalized competency-based learning program. You'll also receive a short survey, which will automatically pop up. Please help us by providing honest feedback, ideas, or even mention if you'd like to be a future presenter. We also have many upcoming live learning workshop webinars available on our website, as well as many pre-recorded webinars covering a variety of topics. We encourage you to check these out, and thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.